Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's get into the story. The first official record of her existence enters as a 911 transcript from a gas station in rural Virginia, 2 counties shy of the West Virginia line. The attendant's voice is level, irritated at first, then unsettled. A young woman has appeared barefoot at dawn, wrapped in a tarp from the dumpster. She is shaking so hard the cups on the counter vibrate. She refuses to sit. She keeps glancing at the tree line as if the trees are listening. She gives a name that will later be confirmed. Elise Ward, 26, registered nurse from Richmond. She says she walked all night. She says the people in the woods are still watching the road. Deputies arrive expecting meth or a domestic fugitive. What they find does not fit a worksheet. Elise's feet are torn but clean, as if she has run through water. Her hair is matted with ash that isn't quite ash. Around her neck hangs a cord of woven plant fiber that she tries, repeatedly and quietly, to remove without touching with her fingers. When an EMT offers scissors, she flinches from the metal. "Don't cut it," she whispers, not yet able to explain why. "They count what you cut." At the hospital, she answers questions in precise fragments, as if building a ladder one rung at a time. She did not set out to camp. She did not volunteer for an adventure. She was traveling with a coworker to a weekend training, missed an exit, and stopped for a hike at a scenic overlook that was not on any state map. The trail looked maintained until it didn't. The last thing she remembers before the world narrowed was a sound like measured work. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. It repeated until it felt like a boundary. Investigators, still thinking of ordinary crimes, pull traffic camera footage from the highway. They see Elise's car enter the corridor near mile marker 201 late Friday afternoon. They never see it leave. Park rangers bring up topographic maps, the kind used by hunters and surveyors, and draw a rough radius from the overlook lot into hollows where cell coverage dies and old fences mean nothing. The area has a reputation older than any office. Families who keep to themselves, trails that veer where they shouldn't, stories told low in church basements about the long people who do not care for asphalt. When Elise is ready, she agrees to an interview with a detective whose voice does not rise or fall. Her posture is rigid, eyes fixed on the corner of the room where ceiling and wall meet. She describes the first signs: carvings on bark that read as numbers rather than art, vertebrae strung on cords and hung eye-high like warnings you're meant to pretend you don't understand. She describes hearing footsteps that did not break leaves, then laughter that did not rise above a murmur. She talks about a net woven from vine and cured hide that dropped with the indifference of gravity. She says she woke in a place that smelled like smoke soaked into stone. The detective asks about people. Elise's words become careful. She says they moved with economy, without waste. Their skin read gray not by birth but by habit. Ash rubbed to mask scent or ritual, or both. Their hair was bound in knots to keep it from catching in brush. Their clothing, where it existed, was a logic of hide and fiber, stitched with bone. She says one carried a blade napped from flint with an edge that flashed even in poor light. She emphasizes a rule: do not show fear in your feet. They watched ankles first. Medical staff document injuries that imply restraint but not spectacle. Ligature marks that are wide, not narrow. Abrasions at hips and shoulders as if carried rather than dragged. Faint burns in a pattern that suggests proximity to a fire used for light, not punishment. A psychologist notes dissociation without delusion. Elise is oriented to person, time, place. She is not inventing landscapes. She is subtracting detail to keep from choking on it. Law enforcement, obligated to act within their map, forms a search grid. Helicopters push air over oak and poplar. Dogs catch a scent and lose it within yards. A deputy with 30 years in uniform tells me off record that the woods felt knotted, a word that appears again in my notes beside the names of 3 previous disappearances no one has tied together publicly. Each case carries a similar echo. An abandoned car at a pull-off. A backpack found intact with no wallet missing. A last message about a beautiful view, and then nothing. The first credible break arrives not from the sky, but from a retired surveyor who has seen lines the public cannot. He brings his own map, hand-marked in pencil, and taps a hollow that doesn't drain like it should. "That's where the old family used to run cattle," he says, then lowers his voice, "and where they say not to take boys after the first frost." The search shifts toward a crease of land where streams vanish underground and reappear colder. There, rangers find the remains of a fire pit ringed by stones blackened to glass. They find bones arranged by length, drilled through and strung. They find a shelter meant to be taken down quickly and rebuilt elsewhere. They find no bodies. Throughout these efforts, Elise remains on a medical hold, and yet she moves like someone who expects to be asked to run. The blinds stay open during the day, and she tracks the light across the floor. At night, she refuses medication that would make her sleep. She tells the nurse she must stay light enough to hear the pattern if it returns. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. She presses her palm against the window when footsteps pass in the hall, then laughs at herself for expecting bare feet. In a brief conference room session, she outlines the rule that kept her alive. It is clinical in its simplicity. Do not participate. Do not answer signals with signals. Do not adopt the rhythm of a place that does not recognize you as human until you prove you are useful. Ask for water only when offered once. Eat nothing warm. Keep your voice below a whisper and your eyes on hands, not faces. When the moment arrives, and she insists it always arrives, choose brush over path and stillness over sprint until you feel the grade under your soles change from duff to gravel. Only then, run. The detective writes this down, then asks the question that matters to careers and budgets and press conferences. Where, precisely, did she escape from? Elise's gaze slides to the corner again. It wasn't one place, she says. It was a way of moving. They folded the woods around me. When they unfolded it, someone looked away. She pauses, organizing memory into something the room can tolerate. I don't think they lost me. I think they let me carry a message. She doesn't say the message aloud. The room hears it anyway in the hush that follows. The case file opens with a date and a name. It does not know yet what to do with a tribe that has never signed a line, that lives behind the fiction of unbroken forest, that has learned to count a modern world's appetite and outlast it. For now, there is only a survivor who will not sleep and a set of hills that shrug at helicopters. And somewhere between the gas station's fluorescent hum and the hollows where streams disappear, there is a cadence that can teach a heart to run. 3 beats, pause, 3 more. A boundary tapping its own perimeter. The official interviews with Elise were conducted in 3 sessions, each lasting less than an hour. Doctors limited the time, concerned that reliving her ordeal would fracture what little stability she had managed to build since arriving at the hospital. Yet within those measured fragments a picture began to form. A map not of roads or coordinates, but of ritual and intention. She told investigators that the tribe did not treat her as prey in the way most people imagine. She was not immediately harmed. Instead, she was studied. The first hours were a blur of firelight and shadows moving in and out of frame. She remembered the smell of damp hides and the sound of stones clinking together in steady rhythm. They circled her, not touching, simply observing. Only later did she understand the purpose: selection. She was being weighed for usefulness, not consumed outright. Their appearance unsettled her more than their actions. They wore layers of ash rubbed deep into the skin, creating a mottled gray surface that seemed to erase features in dim light. Their eyes reflected fire in a way that made it impossible to gauge direction. Hair was bound in knots or shaved entirely. Their clothing was utilitarian: stitched leather, plant fiber, bone fastenings, nothing modern. Nothing that betrayed the century outside the trees. Elise said the silence between them was worse than their chanting. When they moved together, as if following cues she couldn't perceive. The shelter they brought her to was not permanent. It looked designed to vanish within hours, a frame of bent saplings lashed together, covered by hides with bones hanging at the entrance like wind chimes. Inside, the ground was packed with ash, soft enough to record every step. She realized too late that her movements were being tracked by the prints she left behind. They knew how often she stood, how long she slept, even how she shifted in fear. She whispered to investigators that every footprint became part of their record. One moment stood out, a ritual near the fire pit. Elise was led outside at dusk, her wrists bound loosely with vine. Around the pit, half a dozen figures squatted, rocking in unison. One lifted a length of bone, hollowed and carved with markings. When he blew into it, the sound resembled a whistle fractured by static, rising and falling in a rhythm Elise recognized instantly. 3 tones, a pause, 3 tones again. The others answered by striking wood against stone in time with the pattern. It was not a song. It was a boundary line, reinforced by sound. She said it made her chest vibrate as if her ribs were being tuned to their cadence. Investigators asked about others. Elise hesitated. Finally, she admitted she was not alone at first. A second captive was held nearby, a man in his 30s, name unknown to her, with clothing too torn to identify origin. He tried to speak to her once, whispering encouragement when the guards turned away. Hours later, he was gone. What remained was a strip of cloth tied to a stake near the fire, still damp with blood. Elise lowered her voice when she recounted this, eyes fixed on the recorder. "They don't waste," she said. "Nothing ever goes back to the ground unused." Search teams sent into the area days later found traces that echoed her account. Charred stones blackened into glass, bones drilled and strung in deliberate sequences, ash patches that tested high for calcium, and deeper in one hollow, a snare woven from vine and tendon, still taut, waiting for weight. No prints led away from it, as if those who set it never needed to return. Elise's survival hinged on one moment of fracture. She described a night when the chanting swelled and the tribe's attention shifted. Fires burned hotter. The figures circled in wider arcs. A storm pressed against the canopy, thunder rolling low. In the confusion, one guard stepped too far into the shadows, leaving a gap no wider than her shoulders. Elise slipped into it, pressing her body against bark, smearing ash into her skin to disguise the outline. She stayed motionless for what felt like hours, listening to the rhythm of knocks echo through the trees, waiting for pursuit that did not come. Only then did she run. The detail that disturbed investigators most was her description of the chase. Not running footsteps, not shouted alarms. Simply the knocks, always at the same distance behind her no matter how fast she pushed forward. 3 beats, pause, 3 more. They did not need to follow. They simply reminded her she was still inside their perimeter. By dawn, she reached the gravel edge of a service road, her feet torn and raw, lungs burning. When headlights finally cut through the mist, she collapsed. The driver told deputies later that she appeared not as a lost hiker, but as something delivered out of the woods against its will. Elise's story ended at the roadside. But the investigation, reluctant as it was, had only begun. For every fragment she gave, there were miles of forest that refused to answer. And for every artifact collected, there was a silence too heavy to name. When investigators attempted to retrace Elise's path, they began with the overlook lot where her car had last been seen. The vehicle was there, doors locked, keys absent. Inside, they found her co-worker's duffel bag, untouched, and a stack of training materials for a medical workshop. On the dashboard, a thin layer of ash dusted the surface, out of place in a vehicle parked for only 2 days. The first deputy to notice it wiped the dust with his finger and described the texture as finer than fireplace soot, closer to bone. From the lot, the trail led down into a ravine where streams threaded through laurel and rhododendron. Teams walked grids marking GPS coordinates, flagging potential evidence. They expected litter, discarded clothing, perhaps boot prints. What they found instead were markers, vertebrae strung on cords of plant fiber hanging at eye level from branches. Each vertebra was drilled precisely through its center, smoothed as if handled repeatedly. 20 such markers lined a quarter-mile of trail. Beyond the 20th, there were none. Searchers turned back without entering further. One ranger, speaking anonymously, admitted that the markers felt less like warnings and more like ownership lines. Meanwhile, Elise remained under observation, her story examined for inconsistencies. Polygraph was considered and discarded. Her trauma was too acute. Instead, detectives returned with photographs of the artifacts found. When shown the vertebra markers, Elise did not flinch. She only asked how many had been counted. When told 20, she shook her head. "Then you weren't inside," she said softly. "The ones that matter are deeper. They start again at 0. The third interview session pushed her to recount the escape. By then she had slept little, her eyes sunken, but her words sharpened into clarity. She described the night of the storm. Thunder masked the sound of her breath. The tribe gathered in a circle around the fire, voices raised in a chant that echoed the knocking rhythm. She realized they were marking time, syncing bodies to the same cadence. One figure wore a headdress of antlers, another carried a stone blade raised toward the sky. She said the chanting shifted to a low hum that vibrated the earth beneath her feet. That was when she noticed the guard's absence. That was when she pressed herself into shadow, smeared ash across her arms, and waited. The detectives asked how she managed to move without being seen. Elise explained that the forest itself provided cover. Rain thickened the air, smudged outlines. She matched her breathing to the storm's rhythm, stepped only when thunder cracked. She did not run at first. Running would have betrayed her. Instead, she crept, aligning herself with trees, staying low, keeping the fire at her back until its glow dissolved. Only then did she break into a sprint. Her description of the chase remained the most disturbing detail. She did not hear pursuit in the ordinary sense. No footsteps, no branches snapping, no shouting. Only the knocking, steady and inescapable. She said it came from every direction, as if the forest itself was producing it. No matter how far she ran, the rhythm followed. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. She whispered that it wasn't meant to catch her. It was meant to remind her that escape was impossible. "They don't hunt the way we think of hunting," she said. "They close the circle until you accept you're inside." Investigators pressed for how she finally broke through. Elise lowered her eyes. She said she ran until her legs no longer obeyed, until every breath cut like fire. At some point, the knock ceased. She looked up and saw gravel beneath her feet instead of soil. The forest opened into a service road lined with utility poles. She collapsed before headlights appeared. When she woke again, she was in the hospital. She insisted the silence that followed was not mercy. It was permission, she said. They let me leave so I could carry the boundary with me. Back in the field, searchers pressed deeper, driven by duty if not by belief. They found remains of fire pits arranged in clusters, stones blackened to glass, bones sorted by size, drilled and strung, a half-buried cache of stone tools, edges still sharp. One site contained a structure, bent saplings lashed together, covered with hides hardened by smoke. Inside lay a bed of ash imprinted with footprints small and large, overlapping, layered by years. No modern trash was found. No sign of ordinary habitation. No cans, no plastic, no metal. Whoever lived there did so without leaving the century behind. The sheriff's office faced pressure from families of other missing persons. Old cases were dragged into daylight. A college student who vanished on a road trip in 2009. A pair of hunters never recovered in 2015. A woman whose abandoned car was found only miles from Elise's. In each file, the same details emerged. No robbery, no struggle, possessions intact, final sightings near unmarked trails. None of these cases had been connected before. Now they formed a pattern that pointed toward the same ridges where Elise had walked out alone. Elise herself was released into protective custody, though no charges had been filed and no suspects named. She stayed in a safe house with closed blinds, refusing to step outdoors after dark. Deputies assigned to guard her described her nightly routine, pacing the perimeter, pressing her ear to walls, listening for a rhythm only she could hear. On one occasion, she woke the house by pounding the floor in a pattern. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more, insisting it had come from the woods outside. The FBI became involved quietly, sending agents who asked more about anthropology than crime. They wanted descriptions of the tribe's practices, their tools, their language. Elise answered carefully, describing what she could. Flint blades, bone whistles, knots tied in hair, chanting that carried no English words. She said their silence was more dangerous than their voices. When pressed to estimate their numbers, she said only, "Enough to close every exit." And yet, for all the detail, one question lingered. Why her? Why had she been allowed to leave when others had not? Investigators circled the question but never received a clean answer. Elise herself seemed unsure. She suggested that her escape was not escape at all, that the tribe had chosen her to bear witness. "They don't hide because they're afraid," she said. "They hide because they don't need to be seen. They let one out every so often, just to remind the rest of you that they're still here." The sheriff ended the final debrief with a sentence that never made it into the official report. It was spoken quietly to no one in particular. Some things don't get solved. Some things just keep walking beside you. The forest was closed to recreational hiking for 6 weeks. When it reopened, no signs marked the danger. The missing posters stayed up, their faces fading in the sun. And the knocks, if they came again, were not reported. Officially, the case ended with one survivor. Unofficially, the boundary remained, unseen but intact, waiting for the next name to cross it. Elise's case remains both a miracle and a question mark. Officially, the file concludes with her survival, a note on traumatic stress reaction, and a recommendation that she not be pursued for further testimony. Unofficially, the story lingers in hushed conversations among deputies and rangers who walked those same ridges and returned uneasy. Months after her escape, hikers reported hearing strange knocking deep in the hollows. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. Each time, they dismissed it as woodpeckers until the pattern repeated at night. A pair of campers described seeing faint lights moving between trees, fireglow without flame. Their story was logged, then buried. Elise herself withdrew from public view. She left her nursing job, changed addresses twice, and severed most contact with friends. Those who did see her said she never stayed in one place after dark, always keeping a small bag by the door. One neighbor recalled hearing her whisper at the window during a storm, as if answering a call only she could hear. The investigation stalled. The artifacts recovered, bones, tools, structures, were boxed and sent to evidence storage, then quietly removed under federal authority. Local officials were told the matter fell under heritage preservation. Files were sealed. The sheriff retired not long after, refusing interviews. And yet, the silence does not erase what Elise carried back with her. Her words remain, it wasn't an escape. It was permission. She insists the tribe still moves in the hidden corridors of the Appalachian forests, folding the land around them, counting intruders not as threats but as resources. Whether you believe her or not, the pattern is hard to ignore. Cars abandoned at trailheads. Campsites found intact, their owners vanished. Reports of knocking that follow no bird, no branch. Each disappearance written off as misadventure, exposure, or bear attack. Each family left with questions that maps cannot answer. For Elise, survival was not an ending but a burden. She knows they allowed her to walk out, and that permission has an expiration. The message she carries is less about warning and more about inevitability. The hidden tribe does not need to be